All right. Thank you all so much for coming to this latest addition to the workshops in our Future Directions Forum series for 2022. As you all might know, I very much enjoy all of my interactions and collaborations with everyone at the American Psychological Association, and in particular, I've drawn a great deal of satisfaction and value out of my interactions with all the great folks within their advocacy office, and so it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have them over today to give us an idea about what it's like to be involved in advocacy work with the American Psychological Association. So without further ado, Patricia, Doris, Angela, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everybody. We are so happy to be here this afternoon. I'm Pat Cobor, APA's Deputy Chief for Scientific Affairs Advocacy. Our presentation today will have 4 parts. I'll kick us off with an overview of advocacy actions. Then Angela Sharp will talk about how to communicate with lawmakers. After that, Doris Parfait-Claude will explain what meetings with lawmakers generally look like. And we'll do an activity together. We'll practice researching our lawmakers and preparing a light pitch, and we'll all take questions at the end. So save them up. All right, let's jump in. What are advocacy actions? We know advocacy can sound like a hazy concept, and it can be intimidating to talk to elected officials. So we're going to give you concrete and actionable information to get you started. These skills will apply at all levels of government. Often issues that start at the state level bubble up to the federal level or trickle down from the federal to the state. We want you to be able to use these skills in multi-pronged campaigns if needed. Thanks. Your expertise and perspectives as psychologists are much needed right now. The country is reckoning with the long-term effects of the pandemic. Many states are either creating barriers or expanding access to mental health services, and Congress is working on a large mental health legislative package. There are 3 types of activities to make your voices heard at this critical juncture. 1 is chiming in, 2 is building bridges, and 3 is empowering diverse voices. We'll explain each category and the effect it has on policymakers. That way you could decide how you want advocacy to fit into your life, and you can mix and match activities depending on your availability and experience. Next. If you're just beginning as an advocate, action alerts and social media posts are easy ways to get involved. Many organizations targeting all levels of government will share pre-written messages that you can send. The downside to one-touch actions is that the content's often impersonal. That makes each individual message less persuasive to policymakers. However, in large quantities, these messages have a cumulative effect. Officials treat pre-written messages like a temperature check. The more touches they get, the hotter they think an issue is, and the more they pay attention in case it comes up in election season. By engaging in one-touch actions, you help elevate an issue by increasing its temperature. How many touches make an issue hot? Well, that depends on the office that you're targeting. So don't be discouraged by hearing that it takes a lot of messages to have an impact. The term "a lot" is relative. It'll take far fewer messages to get the attention of a city council member or state legislator than it would your members of Congress. That's because their constituencies are different sizes. It's easier to be loud in a smaller room. As a final note on these topics, offices notice when someone adds their own words to a pre-written message, and they'll pay more attention in those cases. Remember, they're seeing dozens of copies of the same message. So when one message starts off differently or has an extra paragraph, they'll notice, they'll read that one. Pardon me just a moment. All right, let's talk about intermediate. On the next level of advocacy is direct contact, like emails written from scratch or attending meetings or events. These activities are more impactful than written messages because they put your humanity in the forefront. Officials and their staff value 2 aspects of these interactions. First, hearing personalized stories often helps them translate abstract policies into concrete situations. Second, This gives them the opportunity to ask questions, make comments, see how you react to them. Policymakers value dialogue because it helps them get a read on the political climate, and they can ask questions to understand why the climate's that way. Understanding the why can help them better evaluate policy proposals. So the more they hear your reasons for caring about an issue, the more they might be willing to compromise. And you don't have to give all your reasons in one sitting. You can make opportunities to follow up. The more often you reach out, the more you build familiarity over time, that will turn to trust. If you have bandwidth, don't let your activities stop after one meeting. Email policymakers to give them quick updates. Ask them to meet again when there are new developments on an issue. And there are lots of ways you can do that. If you're asking, say, for funding for a research program and that program issues a new publication, forward it to them. You can include a note about how this is an example of why this program is so important. And if you ask them to co-sponsor a bill a few months ago and you've learned since that it passed to a next step in the process, like coming out of review by a committee, you can ask for a new meeting. Meetings are often easier to get at the state or local level because you're competing with fewer people for the time. However, there's an important caveat for state legislatures. You have to pay attention to the session schedule. Unlike Congress, which has staff in the office the year round, some state legislatures only meet for a few months and others only every other year. Legislative calendars can be found on the websites. All of this is to say that depending on where you live, the pace of meetings and follow-up might be much more condensed. It might be 2 to 3 weeks of intensive calling and then a lull period for a few months. So think about how you might maintain the relationship you're building during those lull periods. Next slide. Identifying diverse voices who can contribute to the conversation has a very high impact, but it takes more experience to do it successfully. It involves being aware of which groups are active on your issues, which ones are missing, and how you can find common ground with them. Policymakers know how hard it is to find common ground amongst groups. They pay extra attention when they see joint letters or when they meet with a group representing different viewpoints. It helps them get a sense of how an issue affects different sectors. Maybe it's not just a narrow, but not a special interest issue. For example, if a group shows up with farmers, psychologists, and car manufacturers, officials would notice. It takes a big issue to cut across groups like that. Thankfully, you won't need all your coalitions to be that eclectic. A lot of coalition work happens between groups in the same sector, say health, but different professions within it. And if the group includes stakeholders they don't usually hear from, policymakers will appreciate it even more. So here's a key point. Thus far, we've talked about what kinds of activities an advocate may engage in. But we understand one challenge for advocates is finding entry points. How do you know which organizations to work with, and where do you learn about which bills to follow? Which branch of government can fix your problem? Finding answers to these questions isn't always intuitive, but you don't have to figure this out by yourself. APA services and your state psychological associations are here as resources. We can let you know which issues are getting traction and point you to existing campaigns. We can counsel you on which policymakers to approach and more. On topics where we or state associations don't have resources, we can point you toward partner organizations and coalitions who do. These entities exist for every level of government, and they can help you find activities that suit your interests. Next slide. Aligning yourself with group efforts and strategies does not compromise your voice as an individual, and it's important to remember that. But it might mean adapting to new tactics and sacrificing some nuance in the name of unity. We encourage advocates to leverage organizations and coalitions because they have resources individuals can't replicate. That includes expensive tools and subscriptions to track issues, organize groups, and more. But your role as a constituent is irreplaceable and highly valuable. Relying on existing efforts doesn't diminish that in any way. You are living through the very issues policymakers are trying to address. You can give them on-the-ground impressions that organizations can't. Your personal and professional experiences make your stories and voice unique. So now Angela's going to talk about how to get your message across. Angela.
Thanks, Pat. Now we're going to focus on how to present information in a short and compelling way. We're going to concentrate on the moment when you explain why an issue is important and how officials can help. That is called a pitch, and these tips will work for both written and spoken pitches. A strong pitch would build all the elements in this slide in a narrative form, and we'll cover that next. But an important takeaway from this slide is that a pitch is just the beginning of a conversation. It's easy to feel as if each meeting is your only shot at swaying the office, but the legislative process is lengthy, with many chances to follow up. So trust that you will have opportunities to say more on the issue over time and use your pitch to create different openings for engagement. Let's dive in a bit about what we mean when we say openings for engagement. This feel, know, do framework can help you concisely cover groundwork, data, explaining the problem, and why this bill amendment policy change is a solution. Select the anecdotes you want to share based on the feelings you want to evoke. If you're going for empathy, share a sad story, and so forth. How can you show that you are connected to the issue and to the office constituency? You can connect to an issue through work, personal experiences, or speaking on behalf of people affected by it. You can also add weight to your anecdotes with statistics. For example, if you talk about working in emergency services, you could share data about psychiatric hospitalizations increased during hot weather. Finally, wrap up your pitch by explaining how the bill would help Organizations like APA Services can give you talking points for that. Then prompt the office to engage with you. We know this can sound a bit abstract, so we'll show you some examples in a while. We have a few more tips to go through first. Being organized in advance helps save you time during the meetings. You might only have a few minutes to make your case, so you will want to keep your pitch short. For example, the official might be running late and ask you to talk to them while they walk to another meeting. That means you might have to make a snap decision on what information to share now and what information to save for another time. Studying and organizing your talking points in advance will make that easier. Start brief and share the essentials up front. Then expand if you have the time. If the official has more time, they can ask follow-up questions if your pitch is short. For a written pitch, being organized and brief will make it easier for staff to get key points, even if they just skim your message. Why do we say keep it simple? In both federal and state offices, you might be engaging with early career staff in their 20s. They will not have the expertise in your issue, so you don't want to overwhelm them with technical information. Use simple terms and avoid using a lot of acronyms. Policymakers also have limited bandwidth and attention spans because they receive many competing demands. In fact, in some state legislatures, there might be only one staffer shared between 2 or 3 legislators. Usually, the smaller the constituency and office, the smaller the budget for that office. That often means staffers wear multiple hats, and that's not just in the case of state and local government. Congress has differences in resources too. For example, in the House of Representatives, offices are smaller, so legislative assistants often double up as legislative correspondents. That means they have less time to research issues than legislative assistants in the Senate. Simple messaging allow you to cut past all the clutter these staff can face. And while finally, concrete means giving specific examples, be they about yourself, a patient, or your community. Anecdotes make a talking point come alive. We gave you 6 components to think through: feel, know, and do. Then short, simple, and concrete. We're now going to run through examples of different pitches that use these guidelines. The scripts for these videos are in the appendix for your reference. They also work as examples of emails. In this and the next example, you would jump in after introducing yourself. Hold on one second. And stating your purpose. Our first example shows how you can draw a policymaker into your world or your patient's world and incorporate facts you learn about them.
During the pandemic, I've been able to support more patients by leveraging remote technology. That's because at the start of COVID-19, the government instituted increased flexibilities around telehealth. For example, for the last 2 years, I've been able to offer phone meetings without having to require an in-person follow-up. This has made a huge difference for a lot of people. For example, one of my patients is a health worker struggling with everything she's seen during the pandemic. Her schedule is hectic and she barely has time to meet, much less travel back and forth to and from my office. I saw you worked as a nurse before running for office, so I'm sure you understand what that schedule can be like. Being able to call in from wherever she is means she doesn't have to sacrifice her well-being for her patients. Unfortunately, once the pandemic ends, many of these regulatory flexibilities will go away unless Congress acts. Of course, my patient will continue to have very long shifts after the pandemic ends, especially since her hospital is now short-staffed. She told me that if we have to go back to meeting in person, she would not be able to get help as often as she needs it. We need more flexibility to meet patients like her where they are. This bill would help by making the temporary changes in regulations permanent. Over 50 national organizations support this bill, including APA. I'd be very happy to share a copy of the letter with you if that would be helpful. Would you be interested in co-sponsoring this legislation?
Let's talk through the elements of this pitch. Alex set the stage by talking about how the world of psychology changed during the pandemic. Notably, her hypothetical practice became a lot more flexible. In just a few words, she conveyed the image of a patient with very little free time in a chaotic environment. Flexibility makes a world of difference for this patient. She connected the dots to an experience she knows the lawmaker had as a nurse. That would help this official more vividly imagine the situation themselves. So the emotion we honed in on is one of empathy. You know how stressful this person's life is, and there is a clear way for you to help them. Then Alex connects the dots between that feeling and the changes in policy she is talking about. The whole goal of a pitch like this is to make policymakers pause and think through the needs of their constituents. It does so by focusing on how unforeseen consequences play out in real life. That makes it good for motivating lawmakers to intervene and stop these consequences from happening. Mitigating or preventing harm is an important component of advocacy, and many campaigns are built around that approach. This example is, in contrast, shows how you can encourage policymakers to embrace change.
I am one of 2 psychologists in my clinic who speak Spanish, and we are desperately struggling to meet the needs of clients who do not speak English. It is heartbreaking to see our waiting lists grow because we do not have enough staff to schedule appointments. Not having more diversity is having real-life implications for patients. When patients have to describe their challenges in a language that they are not fluent in, we might miss a key nuance or detail. That could affect the diagnosis and next steps we take. This legislation can help by creating more diverse pipelines into psychology. In my clinic alone, 1 more Spanish-speaking psychology would reduce our waiting list by 20%. That means fewer families struggling with hunger because a parent is getting the treatment they need to stay in the workforce. More students in this district would be able to stay in school because budding conditions would be identified before developing into a crisis. What are your thoughts on introducing this legislation?
This example encourages change by creating a sense of what is versus what could be. Kenneth in this video lays out his current situation, one where a community of color is not getting timely care because of language barriers. He shows a brighter future where the ripple effects of those individuals getting care extends to their family. The emotion he touches on is hope, a world where students stay in school, where families have food on the table. And in a few sentences, he shows officials their role in creating a brighter future and how they can get credit for that work. He asked them to sign on to a bill that directly targets the shortage of multilingual psychologists. Supporting the bill is the kind of things they can talk about in campaign speeches. Changing the status quo can be a risky proposition for officials because it is the unknown to them. After all, the previous pitch example was all about how policy can lead to bad surprises. If you are the one pushing for change, though, your goal is to make the change less scary. You can do that by helping them envision positive results. Policymakers run for public offices or join government agencies because they want to do good. They might have a different definition of good than you do, and over time they might become more jaded. But at heart, they want to make a difference. Pitches like this one can help to rekindle that flame. Some of you are represented by officials who hold a more influential role. This sample pitch centers on the policymakers' importance.
We are really facing a mental health crisis among youth in our state. Recently, I started seeing a teenage girl who's struggling with depression. Even just to request a meeting with me, she struggled with months of self-doubt. She didn't know who to ask for help, how to get it, and she couldn't rely on her parents to help navigate the process. Every day, she was at risk for self-harm. I was grateful that I was able to start seeing her when I did, but many adolescents in our state are not getting the help they need in time. In fact, we've seen a significant increase in the rate of teen suicide. We're coming to you because as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, you're in a unique position to work with your colleagues on a solution. Here's a list of policies developed by the American Psychological Association with support from several other organizations to help address youth mental health. We would love your support to turn this into a reality. It would have a huge impact on our state in helping youth get the support they need. Are these policies something that you would consider supporting?
The strategy in this pitch is to directly reference the policymaker's special role, in this case, a committee member. Committee members play a very important role behind the scenes, helping organize their colleagues to sign on to bills. They also push for bills they care about during the review process. In fact, when officers learn about legislation from advocates, it's not uncommon for them to ask if members of a committee support it. That can affect whether an office supports a bill. They know the power of committee support that happens at the state and federal levels. This approach would also work for officials who informally own an issue in their delegation. For example, a legislator could have spent years learning about an issue and be consulted by other offices for their opinion on proposals. Or they have a personal stake in the issue. Maybe their loved one has a mental illness and they form a caucus with other legislators with similar views. In either scenario, they are in a position to give your proposal an extra boost while it gets off the ground. In the case of former gatekeepers, by moving it through the policy process. In the case of more informal influencers, by recruiting co-sponsors on your behalf. In this video, Alex used her pitch to give key gatekeepers a sense of buy-in. Advocacy can also mean serving as an ambassador for a program, research, or policy. In this case, describing your own career path or personal experience is very effective.
I first became interested in helping people in my senior year of high school. A friend was having a really tough time after his parents divorced, but I could see how talking about it made him feel better. That sense of connection and helpfulness drove me to take an intro to psychology class in college. From there on out, I knew I had found my career. But a PhD could mean a decade of balancing school with life in general and accruing a huge amount of debt. I had to pay my own way through the entirety of my studies. The Psychology Entry Grants program made a huge difference for me during that time. It gave paid training opportunities so I could build on my knowledge while earning a living. That helped me get past a big barrier to entry. I now lead a program that helps 1,500 people in rural communities every year. There are plenty like me who could make a difference in people's lives if they could only benefit from a program such as this one. This program now desperately needs funding. Do you think your office would be willing to support its renewal?
In this video, Kenneth taps into people's love for underdog figures. He lays out barriers to entry, financial constraints, and stigma around the issue in his community. Then the story seeks to create inspiration. He describes how the program helped him earn a living while finding peers who shared his passion. Thanks to all of that, he is now making a difference in the world. Then he connects the dots to the policy need. The program that helped all of this happen needs funding. This kind of pitch works because policymakers love hearing real-life examples from their constituents. They use them in speeches or to convince colleagues to sign on to their efforts, co-sign the bill, fund a program, etc. So far, our examples have focused on using personal or client experiences in your pitches, but you can also use ties to local institutions to establish your credentials.
The hospital that I work at is the single largest employer for North County and the only hospital within reach of the Northeast and Northwest counties. This year alone, we supported 300 patients experiencing a mental health crisis. Unfortunately, this has taken a huge toll on our staff. Many are burnt out and many have left. If we cannot recruit more staff, we might have to close the program entirely. This document lists 2 solutions that would help us both recruit and retain new staff. With these policies, we can keep helping these 300 people and maybe even take on more patients. Would you be able to support these bills?
In this video, Alex starts by explaining her employer's importance to the community. They are not only a major employer for the county, they also treat a lot of patients from a broader region. Those starting sentences establish 2 things to policymakers. First, the fate of the hospital and the community are intertwined. That means her organization has local influence. Alex is speaking on behalf of hundreds of people she has a direct connection to as a fellow employee in addition to patients. Second, the opening established expertise. In this scenario, Alex works for the sole hospital in the region. That means she has access to people with a very good sense of health trends in the region. So she is setting herself up as a resource who can share important insights. For example, if in the future a national group comes in to advocate on health issues, that office might call Alex to ask how the policy that group wants would affect the hospital. That is why it is important to explain your reach in a constituency. If you follow up often, offices might start relying on your insights and trusting you more and more. Again, these pitch formats work as much in writing as in person. But when you are meeting in person, you're looking to create an exchange, and Doris will walk us through that now.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to introduce myself to the group a bit. I am Doris Parfait-Claude, Director of Grassroots Engagement. So later on, if you have questions on how to engage, I'll be here as a resource. So we're going to go over what meetings with elected officials typically look like. As I've mentioned before, well, as we've mentioned earlier in this presentation, I mean, this applies as much to federal as state and local officials. We'll also discuss reading the room and adjusting your approach accordingly. Meetings with elected officials are generally short, and in the Zoom era, they have become shorter. While at the state and local level, a lot of in-person visits have resumed due to security concerns at the federal level, especially Congress. Many offices are still only doing virtual visits. Congressional staff, especially, are often off camera to not have their backgrounds be a distraction. They might be at home in an apartment with roommates or in a cubicle near a busy hallway. It's not a sign of disengagement when they are off camera, though it does make it harder to get a read on them. And I do want to stress that it's okay to not have answers to questions that they might ask you at any level of government. Offices will trust you more if you say, I don't know, than if you take a random guess and later on they find out it's not true. So don't worry about having to be an expert on a bill when you advocate, especially since you'll have organizations oftentimes who'll be there to help you. You can instead focus on getting a read on the person that you are talking to, because that's one of the big differences between written communications and meetings, the ability and sometimes the necessity of reacting to your audience's current mood. Generally, going to a meeting, you want to build both the personal connection to staff and make your case. You have a lot of ground to cover. However, their mood and bandwidth should determine your strategy. If they are not receptive, you might need to focus on the essentials and mostly the ask in that case to make the most of your limited time. You'll be able to get a read on that within the first few minutes of a meeting. If the staff or official is relaxed and is willing to do some small talk with you, then it'll be an excellent time to kind of use those opening moments to start building a personal connection. Ask them things like how their week is going, or if you're talking to a staffer, whether the state that they represent is one that they're originally from. You can learn fascinating things about where people have moved from and where they came from. And we're doing this because people ask staff and offices all day long to do things for them. They appreciate having a few minutes of just being seen as a human being. And if they're relaxed at the start, if they're talking about things like the weather over the course of the week, it means they'll likely have more time for you to share longer anecdotes or additional information. So you can run your pitch can run a bit longer. You can throw in some extra statistics that you might have cut if they were telling you, for example, that they have a 25-minute, they have a stop in 25 minutes. So in contrast, if you're noticing that they seem stressed or hostile, they're looking at their watch a lot, show them that you understand that they're under pressure, and give them that space. Skip the small talk, use shorter anecdotes, and shift a lot more of the things you would have said in person to written follow-up. If needed, if you're sensing that it's less about their time and more about the specific thing you're asking about, then pivot to more neutral territory and ask them if there are other topics that you can help them with. They might not be able to support the issue you want to talk about at this time, but they might keep the door open on different topics. Avoid confrontations, because people will definitely remember someone who either made them smile on the good sense or made them frown or felt like attacked and panic. You want to be remembered in a good way. People's feelings and circumstances might change over time, so you never know what your conversation today could lead to in the future. A little pivot to another topic, that might actually be something that they become a champion on down the line. And not feeling pressured in the moment will make staff more responsive to you in the future when those changes occur. So the tips that Angela gave you to prepare your pitch also apply to preparing for your meetings. This is where which is why I'm coming back in and reiterating them here. Your advocacy will be more impactful if you think of it as a series of steps rather than one single big action. What happens before and after an interaction with an official or their staff matters as much as what happens in the time that you're talking to them. So whether in writing, on the phone, or in a meeting, you will be more successful if you prepare content in advance. So we're going to shift gears a bit now to a short activity, and it's going to help put all of this together. After the activity, we'll quickly review some key points, and then we'll come back, do a Q&A session before Andres closes out the session. So bear with me for a few minutes so I can, because I'm soon going to stop sharing my slides and walk you through two different processes: finding out who your elected officials are, and then looking at their website to glean topic-specific information about them. Then we'll touch upon how you can use that information in combination with talking points to form a pitch. For the activity itself, we'll share some prompts with you and then give you 10 minutes to outline a pitch. We'll then ask volunteers to walk us through their outlines, and we'll give some pointers. After this training, we'll also want to give you an opportunity to practice written pitches. We'll send out a link to an action alert asking Congress to pass a mental health reform package. The alert will have pre-built talking points that you can personalize. So as I said, bear a few seconds with me. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and pop open a new one. So here, excuse me, because I have to turn my head. This is on a different screen for me. We should be on the ballot media page to find out who represents us. So we're going to quickly enter APA's address, which if I recall is 700 First Street Northeast, DC. I actually don't remember the zip code off the top of my head.
20002.
Thanks, Pat. You don't need to give them your raw email address for this service. That's just an optional thing. So once you've entered that, it'll pop up various offices. If DC actually had a senator, we would also have senatorial information at the top here. If it was a state, instead of the attorney general, you would have your governor, your lieutenant governor, your state attorney general, all those other offices. Where it says city council here, you would instead have your state legislatures and so on and so forth. And then, your city councilors as well. So I'm going to open this page just to kind of show you what happens. You'll get a general summary here. But much more importantly is this section here that's showing their direct contact information and their official website. So this is Congresswoman Holmes Norton. She's not going to have as much content as some other offices just because of the limitations on what she can vote on. So I'm now going to shift to our senator's webpage. Can somebody verbally confirm if you can see the change in tab?
Yes, we got Chris Van Hollen.
Yes.
Perfect. So at multiple points when we did the pitch presentation, we referred to personalizing and tying back to your officials' interest. And this is the part where you kind of tie those parts together and figure out how to do that. There's really 2 or 3 main places that I look at when I'm looking at an official's website. First, in their about, I might go straight to their biography and kind of just quickly skim, see where their ties are. Maybe they went to what the same college as you. Maybe they're like from your original hometown. All of this will be listed, or maybe they have an interest in the region that you're working on. That already kind of gives you a few talking points that you can note to yourself. You can also look at their legislative report. So for our prompt, we're going to be looking at the mental health. We're going to be requesting mental health packages, so we're going to quickly skim through their record to see if there is anything that touches on that topic, which we see here. And you don't really need to know the specifics about this bill or even just the context in which it arose, but it gives you one little extra anchor that you can use in your opening minutes in those meetings. You can also kind of look at their priority issues if something is more specific to you, just to see what they say on it in general. Don't think he has a mental space spot, but he does have healthcare. All of these will give you just a few general ideas about where this person's at, how well they're aligned with you, and what you can expect if you're going to be meeting with them. So generally, Senator Van Hollen is fairly in line with investing in mental health resources. We saw that one bill, the way you would work all of this together, when you would go in, introduce yourself, say your name, and then explain, that that the senator is interested in mental health issues. You saw that he recently co-sponsored a bill to increase funding for centers, which was that bill that we highlighted earlier. You might mention that he's interested in this Chesapeake Bay, so you are from the Chesapeake Bay. Outside of mental health issues, you're happy, you're invested in his efforts to protect it. But really today, you're here to talk about a specific bill, and then you would launch into your pitch. This is where you kind of start out by saying, I'm asking you to do this because you kind of build your narrative. That's kind of the point of this activity. I'm going to bring us back now to the slide so we can kind of walk through how you can connect those extra pieces with your talking points. So in terms of connecting with talking points, here is actually directly the text that's in the action alert we'll send out afterwards. That's pre-built, how you would personalize something like that. So we kind of gave you that introduction at first, right? Thank you, Senator, for your interest in mental health issues. I noticed that you supported this bill. I want to bring your particular attention to, let's, for example, pick something off this list. So strengthening the mental and behavioral health workforce. I want to bring attention to the need for us to have a stronger mental and behavioral workforce. Then, for example, we can kind of seek into something that was like that pitch we saw from Kenneth. I work in a clinic that is heavily short-staffed. This is the current challenge that we're facing. These are the way these challenges can be improved. This is why we need your action now as opposed to in a few years. And you would again wrap back into your ask. Please support passing a mental health package at the end of the year. If you need more resources, if you want more specific policies, please contact APA services, or if you're doing this for another organization, you would tie it back to the organization. A lot of times organizations actually give even more built out talking points. So you would have like sub bullets between each of these items. We really want this to be more about your personal story, which is why we're giving you the broad line. So that's kind of it in terms of the overview. I'm going to punt us to our prompts. We'll give you about 10 minutes or so to kind of come up with an outline based on everything we've shown you. We're here to answer questions during this whole time. And I'm going to quickly, and I see that Jenna put in the chat for the Ballotpedia. So if you want to go and see who your officials are and further personalize it, that's the link that you would use. And again, over the next 10 or so minutes, we'll let you think through how you would approach your officials to ask for a mental health reform package, tie it to your own personal experiences. You don't need to go deep into your personal life. You don't need to bring out like, you know, the events that made you very sad or any such thing, but, you know, tie it to an experience that's on the ground. You know, Pat, Angela, and I are registered lobbyists. We are not who they want to hear from. They know we're paid to say whatever. So think about if you were an official and you wanted to know what was affecting your district, what would be the things that you could tell your official that I would not be able to tell them? And again, I'm just going to stop and be quiet now, but we're here. I'll monitor the chat as well. Happy to answer any questions over the next 10 minutes as you prepare this outline. And then we'll ask for a brave volunteer to kind of walk us through, and then we'll give you some feedback on what you propose and how we can improve it or what we like about it. All right. Welcome back, everyone. It's been about 10 minutes. We appear to not have lost anyone, so I'm hoping at this point we can have a volunteer kind of walk us through their thought process and outlines for a proposed pitch on mental health reform. If anybody wants to just unmute and hop on. Let's go over some key points. You know, I think we emphasize the, oh, I see something in the chat. Pat, that's you. So, you know, we emphasize researching officials because really, again, because this is the beginning of a conversation with, anytime you do a pitch, you want to be able to connect with the person on a human level, find some common ground. You know, some of you might wonder, because I've gotten this question in the past during advocacy trainings, why should I bother looking that much into an official and trying to show that I'm aligned with them when I'm likely going to be meeting their staff and they won't be in the room? So the reason that we talk about such things as researching officials is because the staff are there to support the official. It's their job to make their boss's vision for the world become real. And the more that you can show them that you understand that vision, you might not agree with it, but that you understand where it's coming from, the more they'll relax with you and the more they'll be willing to engage with you, because they think, okay, this is somebody who is at least willing to talk. And this is somebody who's willing to explain where my boss is coming from. So that's why, you know, your pitch should always be tailored to the official, even if you're not meeting with them. It's just another way of showing that you're not going in there to just talk at them, that you're actually wanting to engage, you're wanting to share your reasons for why you believe in a certain way. You're willing to hear back the challenges that they're facing. They might be hearing from communities with insights that you are not familiar with, or that you might not have had a chance to think about. And if you're willing to show that you engage, it'll just open more doors for you. Concrete examples and anecdotes. So, you know, every Hill staffer hears, or any elected official at any level of government hears so much jargon all day long. You know, they're looking at bills that are written in quasi-Latin. They are dealing with a lot of obscure things that they might not be as familiar with. You know, somebody might be coming in to complain about a regulation that they have not heard of, that they have to learn very quickly. And all of this, you know, they came in to help their constituencies, right? So the question that they're asking themselves as they're listening to these stories, or as they're listening to somebody explain an issue with them, is, what does this mean for my district? What does this mean for the people who voted me into office to make their lives better? And the more you use examples of people's, the more you put a face in their head, the more they can like care about an issue, the more it becomes urgent and concrete to them. It's not just some general thing that's hazy, and if they don't really pay that much attention to it, or if they let somebody else become the champion for it, they're not harming anybody, right? Like, whereas if you put a face to it, they're letting somebody down one way or the other, or they're helping somebody. So the more concrete and the more people-oriented your stories are, even though and the more feelings you work into the examples you give, even though we're kind of trained, especially I can imagine as psychologists, you're so used to relying on evidence, you're so trained to think about irrational explanations for things, but really you want to bring in feelings when you're doing a pitch, because that's what motivated the officials that you're working for. And that's what helps put a face to an issue. Follow up. So we mentioned that successful advocacy is a series of events. That first meeting might have set some groundwork, but really they need to hear from you often, right? Ideally, they'll hear from you so much that it's when they don't hear about you that they get worried, because things change. There's a lot of steps in the policy process, and over time you want to build trust, right? And you can't build trust in a single meeting. You can't change somebody's vision of life in a single meeting, but the more you talk to them and the more they know that they're going to hear from you regularly, the more they can verify that what you're saying is true time and time again, the more they will eventually be the ones to reach out to you. As I said, you want to do this so much that they get a little worried when they don't hear from you. And that's when they start picking up the phone and saying like, hey, I've heard from the car manufacturers, I've heard from the farmers, I've heard that this issue has some mental health components. I haven't heard from you. What's going on? And you are not alone, especially for a beginning level advocate. I can imagine that this is just a lot to process, but you have advocacy organizations at every single level of government who are here to walk you through it. APA services, our team is basically paid to work out these problems and think through and monitor the Hill. So if you need to figure out what kind of legislation is important to psychologists right now, what's moving, what's not moving, what offices are more receptive to something, whether your elected officials have big projects that you should be thanking them for, all those kinds of questions about where to start and what next steps you have, we're here to help you on all of that. So those were kind of my key points. I'm going to open up to questions and then we'll hand the mic back to Andres. All right. All right, Andres, it feels like we've taken up enough of the audience's time. I'm happy to hand the mic back to you.
Thank you so much, Doris, and thank you all so much for your time today. I assume that if people have any questions about additional ways in which they can get involved in advocacy within APA, they can contact any of you.
Yes, please.
Definitely.
Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you all for your time. It was a delightful, very informative presentation, and we have another presentation coming up in about 12 days on the 28th. I'll be discussing some strategies relevant to communicating and using storytelling and communication. It shares a lot of overlap with some of the issues discussed today. So thank you all so much. Have a great weekend, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yes.